Welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and I hope that you're all doing well. In past videos on this channel, we've talked about some pretty darn big blocks of megalithic stone, those that are found on the famous ancient sites around the world, particularly in Egypt. Many people know about the utterly massive unfinished obelisk at Aswan, still connected to the bedrock, that's estimated to weigh in at around 1,200 tons. Other finished and standing obelisks, like this one at Karnak, are in the 400-ton range. Then there are the remnants and broken chunks of what once were gigantic single-piece statues of granite or quartzite, like the Colossi of Memnon, each over 700 tons, and other statues that were nearly twice the size. The incredible remnants of a granite statue at the Ramesseum, located close to the Colossi, which was likely at or exceeding 1,000 tons. Even the granite pedestal block for this statue that it was lifted up and placed on top of is around 600 tons. Another example, the mighty arm of a single-piece composite quartzite statue that was originally and remarkably a standing figure rather than one seated. It can be found in the boneyard at Karnak Temple, and similar to the statue at the Ramesseum, is estimated to be in the 1,000-ton range, likely only one of several statues that were once extant on this site. Even far to the north, at Tanis in the delta of Egypt, some 1,000 kilometers distant from the granite quarry, this giant foot, roughly the same size as the foot of the Statue of Liberty, shows that there was once another of these huge single-piece statues located here. These examples of standalone pieces, either obelisks or statues, are found on ancient Egyptian sites that are generally attributed to the later periods of the dynastic civilization, the Middle and New Kingdoms. While I think there is evidence and an argument to be made that they, the artifacts and even the origins of the sites themselves, might well be far older than this, and it's an argument that I do make in my videos that are dedicated to them, links are below, what about the actual Old Kingdom sites? Places like the Giza Plateau, with its mighty stone pyramids, where most, if not all, of the architecture and artifacts are attributed to the oldest periods of known history, and not to later periods of the Egyptian civilization. Are there massive, almost inconceivably heavy single-piece stones found on these locations? Well, in today's video, that's the topic we're going to get into, because in the last couple of years, my good friend Yousef Awyan and I have found what, at least to our knowledge, is the largest single-piece stone on the Giza Plateau, and I wanted to share it with everyone. While the examples I've given so far, the unfinished obelisk, the Colossi of Memnon, etc., are relatively well known and documented, the large blocks on the Giza Plateau are far less well known, yet also represent a tremendous logistical challenge. Before we get into the details, a quick update on the channel and on upcoming events. If you want the chance to check out the incredible sites of ancient Egypt for yourself, I have some good news. Due to demand and the fact that we were forced to cancel our planned extension to Lebanon, we've added a second Egypt tour for 2024. March 3rd to the 18th, 2024, my good friends Yousef Awyan of the Kemet School and Kyle and Russ Allen from the Brothers of the Serpent podcast will be joining me on a tour of Upper and Lower Egypt. With 7 special permission accesses, including a surprise that I'm very excited about, as well as a 4-night Nile cruise, it promises to be a great time. If you're interested, all the details are on my website, unchartedx.com, or via the link below in the description. I'll also be speaking during the total solar eclipse at the Eclipse at the Canyon event next year, April 6th to 9th, 2024, in Utopia, Texas. This is going to be a lot of fun. It's an astronomical event, an ancient mystery conference, and an outdoor camping music festival, all rolled up into one. There'll be a bunch of great speakers, some stand-up comedy, along with live bands, including $50 Dynasty, over 3 nights of camping. If that sounds good to you, all of the details are on the Eventbrite page, which is linked below. I'm also happy to say that the 5th season of Gaia's Ancient Civilization show is available for streaming, and that I was a part of it. If you're interested in checking out the full season, signing up over at Gaia is a great way to help out the Uncharted X channel, and to get access to tons of excellent content on the Gaia network. My affiliate link for a Gaia membership is below in the description and in the comments, as is the link for a special offer for a free 7-day trial if you just want to check it out first before committing. Lastly, in channel news, I've been publishing regular stream highlight videos to my second channel, Uncharted X Live. We do a lot of raw footage review and exploration of various ancient sites, and this is more casual, unscripted, and less produced content, but I can take the time to really get into some details. Check out the channel via the link below, and I'd love a sub over there if you like the content. Now, back to the video. Let's take a quick overview of some of the major features of the Giza Plateau so that we can put the location of some of these large blocks into some context. Of course, the most famous of these monuments here is the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's hard to fully convey the majesty of this architectural achievement. It's just one of those things you have to see in person. Covering an area of roughly 53,000 square meters, just over 13 acres, and standing 146 meters or 481 feet tall, precisely aligned to the cardinal directions. It weighs in at an approximate 6 million tons. Made up primarily of 2.3 million nummulitic limestone blocks, the average weight of each of these blocks is between 2 and 3 tons. Not huge individually, but that's far from the full story when it comes to this monument. While we could talk about the Great Pyramid for hours, we're talking large blocks in this video, and the internal structure of the pyramid certainly has some of those. Particularly, the so-called King's Chamber in the center of the pyramid is made up of very large granite blocks. I always marvel at the size of the block that sits above the entrance. It seems to be easily the largest single block in the walls of this incredible chamber. The largest blocks, however, are the granite beams that form the ceiling. 9 slabs, each in the 60 to 75 ton range.
Just massive.
Not less than 60 tons.
60 each?
At least. Each one of these slabs cannot be less than 60 tons.
We don't even know how far they would go, I'd imagine. They might keep going. Is that the edge of them? I don't know.
It keeps going those ways.
Yeah.
And there's the levels of it, what's so-called pressure relieving chamber.
Right.
And all these giant slabs like this.
The structure continues above the ceiling, with another 4 smaller chambers, typically and incorrectly known as the relieving chambers. These are also made up of huge granite beams, with 8, 9 or 10 blocks making up each chamber's ceiling. In the open space at the very top, named Campbell's Chamber, the ceiling is made from angled blocks of limestone, which do in fact relieve the mass of the pyramid above, but they are supported by the surrounding masonry, not the granite of the central structure, essentially making the granitic architecture below it freestanding. In total, the granite that makes up the entirety of the whole King's Chamber structure is estimated to weigh some 2,500 to 3,000 tons. It's also around 43 meters or 140 feet above the ground level. That is a lot of mass and some very heavy individual stones to get that high up into the air, and an extremely complex and difficult logistical challenge, particularly for an early Bronze Age civilization who did not use the wheel or force multipliers like pulleys or capstans. While the blocks that make up the Great Pyramid's limestone superstructure are generally all between 2 to 3 tons, the middle pyramid of the Giza Plateau is far more megalithic. Some of the blocks in the lower courses are simply enormous. Here you can see Jimmy Corsetti standing on top of one of them when we were both there in 2020. Not only that, but these lower courses have been laid on top of massive foundation tiles, also made of limestone, some easily in the 200-ton range. And these are like three-dimensional puzzle pieces that serve to lock the entire structure down into the bedrock.
But imagine, these are same interlocking pieces like the tiles we just saw over there. But these are like 6-7 times bigger, if not 10 times bigger than the other one. You can achieve this work on a smaller scale because usually when you're trying to lock, there are pieces that is not fitting together. Then you usually remove the piece, remove more material, and keep trying until it locks together. But here, the challenge is different because, of course, the size. Size does matter.
The pyramid is built into a west to east slope of the Giza Plateau, On the eastern side of the pyramid, near where the tourist buses park, you can see just how thick these foundation tiles are, easily over a metre, 3 to 4 feet. Some of these foundation tiles are roughly 10 metres to a side, which is a huge amount of work. Given the rough weight of this type of limestone is about 2.3 tonnes per cubic metre, a 10 by 10 by 1 metre thick block would be around 230 tonnes. As the eastern side was built up with these foundation tiles, the western side of the pyramid had to be, conversely, cut down, which is also a huge amount of work, as the walls of the bedrock enclosure are in places more than 10 metres or 30 to 40 feet tall. The builders even chose to shape the southwestern corner of the pyramid from bedrock itself rather than blocks, and this is a feature that I've covered in more detail in one of my earlier videos on this structure. Another significant difference between the Great Pyramid and the Middle Pyramid at Giza is that the lower course, perhaps even the lower two courses of the Middle Pyramid, were cased in granite, and not the Tura limestone that makes up the rest of the casing, as well as the casing stones on the Great Pyramid. In a few places, these granite casing stones are still in place, and a walk around the perimeter of the pyramid will have you wandering amongst the quarried remnants of these large blocks of very hard stone. Ramses II of the 19th dynasty in the New Kingdom was quarrying and removing the granite from this structure during his reign and recycling it for use on other sites. The perimeter length of the Middle Pyramid at Giza is around 862 metres or 2,824 feet. That's a lot of granite in a course or two, many thousands and thousands of tons. And in some places, the granite blocks even run too deep before butting up against the limestone blocks that make up the superstructure. This granite, considering that it comes from the quarries 500 miles to the south, represents a monstrous logistical challenge, particularly when you consider the cutting and precision shaping of hard stone like this. Something that I've explored in depth in my videos on ancient machining, as well as ancient granite and basalt cutting. Apart from the millions of tons of limestone that are in the pyramid itself, the logistical challenge gets even more insane when you consider the full scope of the entire pyramid complex, and that it was all supposedly completed in only a couple of decades during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, the son of King Khufu. Comprising far more than just the pyramid, the Middle Pyramid complex includes a nearly 500-metre long and very wide constructed causeway, originally with a roof and casing stones, along with two mighty megalithic structures that sit at either end of it. At the far end, it's known as the Valley Temple, and next to the pyramid is the Mortuary or the Pyramid Temple. According to the standard model, also included in this complex, and again all attributed to Old Kingdom Pharaoh Khafre of the 4th dynasty, is the Great Sphinx, as well as the megalithic Sphinx Temple, which sits right in front of it and next to the Valley Temple. It's these so-called temple structures in the Middle Pyramid complex that contain the largest blocks on the Giza Plateau. All three of them have been constructed in a similar fashion. Massive interior limestone blocks that are then cased in precision-carved megalithic granite. The Valley Temple is, by far, the best preserved of the three, with many of its original granite casing stones still in place, and it's spectacular. In this alcove, next to the main entrance, there are granite blocks here that are in the 60 to 70 ton range. And in small areas, the surface of the stone here shows their original finished and polished state, extremely flat and smooth.
That is in a good condition and shows you how smooth and polished the plants were. Let's go inside. So as you know, all this granite survived because it was under the rubble. The entire structure here survived the inside because it was under the rubble as well.
Much of the surface of the granite casing stones in the structure has spalled and eroded in our modern times, but it was all originally flat, square, polished and smooth. Despite the rough surface that we see today, the evidence of the precision fit of these granite blocks can still be found all over the temple. With no mortar between the stones, in places it's difficult to even see where the blocks might have been fit together. The line just disappears. It's an incredible achievement, no matter how you think it might or might not have been done. The Valley Temple also shows us the combination of stone types that seem to be so prevalent in many of the precisely made megalithic structures of Egypt: limestone, granite, and white calcite, which is technically also a type of sedimentary limestone that forms around natural springs, varieties of which are also known as alabaster or travertine. The floor of the Valley Temple is made from blocks of white calcite, and while it comes in various colours, the whitest of calcite comes from near the core or source of ancient natural springs. In a calcite quarry, the further you get from the source of the spring, the more impurities end up in the stone, resulting in yellow or brown coloured calcite. White calcite isn't something that you just find lying around on the surface. The process of sourcing it in large amounts, like what's found in Old Kingdom structures, is a challenge not to be underestimated. Given the colouring and value of these blocks, much of the white calcite has been removed and recycled over time, and the floor here has been repaired and reconstructed in our modern era, but some original pieces remain. Large blocks of white calcite can be seen, their white colouring contrasting against the rose granite, behind the locked doors of alcoves in the Valley Temple. These alcoves are located to the sides of the passage that lead up to the Great Sphinx. Now, we could talk all day about the Valley Temple and its many interesting features, like its incredible precision-made cornice blocks, or its 16 granite columns, or even its U-shaped channeled block that sits in the back. But I'll save those for a future dedicated video on the structure. The important aspect of the Valley Temple here is that its well-preserved state gives us some context when looking at the other megalithic structures of the Middle Pyramid complex. Both the Sphinx Temple and the Pyramid Temple were also cased in granite, in the same way that the Valley Temple was, although today nearly all of the granite from these structures is gone. A little while back I published a dedicated video on the Sphinx Temple, as it's quite rare to get a chance to take a look inside. It's been closed behind locked gates for decades, but fortunately I had that chance in 2022. At the other end of the causeway, the Pyramid Temple, or Mortuary Temple as it's also known, is the exact opposite. It's fully open to the public, but its details and secrets aren't always obvious or in plain sight. Similar to the Middle Pyramid itself, the Mortuary Temple has been built on top of layers of foundation tiles, which are visible around the edges.
So the entire temple is built on top of a foundation that is also built from stone. And then the stones are built on top of the bedrock itself. So these massive blocks here are not natural bedrock, it's bedrock.
Yeah, so this is all built up on top from the bedrock down here,
Yeah.
layered up.
And all these huge blocks that we see is constructed. With these sizes, it's still interlocking.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy.
And it's like 3 layers deep down here. And there's a channeled block down there too, right? Let me get a look at that. Channeled block there.
Also, we can see the figures, the indentations that we see in the blocks. These shows that the temple was encased all the way to the top, just like the valley.
Yeah.
And there used to be actually more pillars in this one according to the official record. 16 down in the valley and 24 here.
24 of
Makes 40 pillars.
the square pillars, right? The big
The
square
pillars,
granite
exactly
single
like the
piece
one.
pillars. Yeah.
Compared to the Valley Temple, the Mortuary Temple was a considerably larger structure, both in footprint and in terms of what was contained within it. The Valley Temple has 16 granite pillars, many of which are still in place and make for spectacular viewing. Yet the Mortuary Temple originally contained some 24 of these huge granite pillars, although today only remnants of them are found here.
And these are remnants of pillars or something?
Yes, as we said, 24 pillars were found here.
Yeah.
And 16 in the valley, 40 pillars.
Are there any documented round, like pillar? I know we have the round columns at Saqqara and Abu Sir. Do we see any of those here? That's not as far as we know. Okay.
All of them, the ones here and the one in front of the pyramid of Khufu over there,
Yeah.
were
Square.
square or a bit rectangular. Sometimes. Sometimes it's rectangular if it's supporting two lintels, like the two rectangular ones in the Valley Temple. They
Yeah.
are rectangular because two beams, one coming from this side and one coming from that side. So it's supporting a lintel from here and a lintel
From there.
yeah.
The massive limestone core blocks of this structure, which were once fully cased in granite all the way to the top, show signs of tremendous levels of erosion, something that I'll comment on a little later, and many of them are easily over 100 tons each.
This part also was work to lock the granite stone casing, and all this work up there shows, and the one on top of it as well
Yeah.
shows that. So the temple was encased in and out with granite stone, which we see the ruins of everywhere.
Yeah, this is granite. This is a granite casing stone. So all of these shapes you see in the limestone blocks, that's all heavily eroded, were all cased in granite. Insane.
Some people say that the pyramid is from local stone and it weighs around 3 tons for blocking multi-hundred of tons. Block.
Yeah, not like 450 tons.
And most of these are more than 100 tons. Most of the huge
Yeah.
blocks that we see.
The limestone core has been extensively repaired and buttressed in modern times. Damage from erosion has been filled in with bricks and mortar and then covered over and painted to look like limestone.
Now, the erosion was so severe.
I mean, look at
that
this.
The Ministry of Antiquities,
Repaired this.
repaired it by putting these big blocks inside the erosion. So you can imagine how severe this erosion was. So this here is a restoration by the Ministry of Antiquities, and it's not the only part.
Yeah.
There is this part here, this is a huge part. All this is also smaller pieces were made as reinforcement for this piece. to
Yes,
prevent
this is
it
all
from falling.
concrete in here. Yeah.
It's in the core blocks here that we find what I think is the largest shaped stone on the Giza Plateau. It's one of the lower masonry blocks that is set deeply into the foundation. By estimating its height and then pacing out its length and width, we can estimate its volume in cubic meters, which can give us an indication of weight, as this type of nummulitic limestone is around 2.3 tons per cubic meter.
You have documented the large one we found so far before.
Yeah, I want to document that again though. We should paste that out. See, up here at the Mortuary Temple, it's just
Look at
massive
even with
megalith.
this-
So yeah, it's
So-
this block.
Yeah, it's that block.
This one here?
This one. It's the same one.
Yeah.
It's about 4 meters high.
4 meters high, about that.
Look at it. Yeah, about 4 meters high. Until here.
Until here, yeah.
And then more than 7.
More than 7 meters long. Let's see.
About 7 as well.
It's about 7 meters.
So
Yeah, let's look at the calculator here.
look at the calculation. 7 by 7
4 by 7,
equal 20 by
28,
7 equal.
196 cube.
Of course.
In case you missed it, let's just run that calculation one more time. 4 meters high by 7 meters long is 28 by 7 meters wide is 196 cubic meters of limestone. Times that by the average weight of limestone at 2.3 tons per cubic meter, and you get 450.8 tons. So, based on what are probably conservative estimates for width, length, and height, this single block is approximately in the 400 to 450 ton range, perhaps more. One of the few references confirming this comes from Alberto Ciliotti and Zahi Hawassa's book, Guide to the Pyramids of Egypt, of which I own a copy. And in the section on the Mortuary Temple, it reports that one of its blocks weighs an estimated 400 tons. This block has definitely been shaped and carved on one end, but it was likely moved as a much more square piece and then finished in place.
Of course, we can see that this part was worked, so it was probably moved as a cube.
Yes.
And then it was worked after it was placed, as we see in most cases, like what we see here. These parts and the other
So it's
part.
probably worked down, but still moved as a
Look at
cube.
the piece on top of it.
Yeah, crazy erosion, right? So
The
what do
new
you?
generation makes it look even more massive.
The young kids. Yeah. So what do you get? 196 cubic.
Yes.
196 cubic meters times what? 2.3 tons per cubic meter. 2.3.
No, that's 450 tons. If it was
450
originally,
tons.
that's big.
That's a big block. This thing is the biggest block that we found
Here, for example,
on the plateau.
it's the same piece. It's not separate pieces.
Yeah.
There are ample examples of this technique of finishing blocks in place found all over the ancient megalithic sites of Egypt, one of the best examples being the granite casing stones of the Third Pyramid. As with the larger limestone blocks in the Mortuary Temple, these granite casing stones were transported to the site unfinished in order to protect them during transport, and then they were shaped to their final dimensions and finished on site and in place. Lifting and transporting a block of this weight, 400 plus tons, is really no simple matter. With today's technology, it would take some of our largest and most expensive mobile cranes even to load, unload, and place the block. For example, here is the Liebherr LTM 1400 mobile crane, with a maximum load capacity of 400 tons. Even then, at its maximum capacity load, it would not be able to move it very far from its center of gravity. Transporting the block any distance is yet another challenge, although in this case it is likely that it wasn't actually that far. This block would have either been quarried from the limestone bedrock of the Giza Plateau itself, or from some of the other limestone quarries that are located in the modern Cairo region, which are only several miles away. We know that massive blocks were transported long distances in ancient times. The longest distance I know of is that of the colossal 1,000-ton statue that's found at Tanis in the north of Egypt. A block that, unfinished and during transport, might have been some 1,200 to 1,500 tons, and it was transported around 1,000 kilometers from the granite quarries in the south. As mentioned, many of the other limestone masonry blocks in the Mortuary Temple structure are easily over 100 tons each, and they were stacked up high, and then precisely cased in granite. We can see a very similar pattern of core masonry in the Valley and Sphinx temples, with many individual limestone blocks comfortably in the 100-ton range. This one that sits over the entrance to the Sphinx viewing platform in the Valley Temple is huge. Back at the Mortuary Temple, with almost all of the granite removed, you can see how these massive blocks, and today they're very heavily eroded and repaired, were once lifted up and placed on top of each other. In a couple of cases in the Mortuary Temple, the original granite casing stones are still visible. At the entrance to the temple, facing the causeway, massive 11-meter long limestone pieces still have their granite casing stones in front. It's interesting to note here that the block that was on top of the lower one is now in front, having fallen off due to nothing more than severe erosional damage.
And I always looked at the scattered stones, and I thought it's the cause of the recycling.
Yeah.
As we usually see evidence of people recycling. Until I was walking one day over here, because we usually point to the granite stone casing that is under the rubble of the stone that survived under the rubble from the recyclers. And then I noticed the truth. As you can see, the casing stone here That used to encase the entire temple,
Yeah.
just like the Valley Temple down there. And as we mentioned before, that this block here
Fell.
fell. It used to be on top of this one here.
Yeah, and some people think this is like evidence for some sort of ramp, or they were taking blocks here, but this actually fell. It's a stupid idea.
This
Yeah.
is according to his YouTube research. But we see the height of the lower block. This is a separate block from that one, and they are separated right here. And we can see the line of erosion. The original width of the block is from
there.
here until here, of course.
Yeah.
And the same for the one that fell.
Yeah.
So as we can see, the deterioration kept eroding and eroding until they could no longer support each other.
And it fell. Yeah.
Just by realizing that, I looked at the rest of the structure, and you can see the entire structure is actually falling apart, not from recycling,
From erosion.
from erosion.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's crazy.
It is. Well,
It
it's
looks really old.
it does seem quite old. Yes,
We,
that's
of course, need more investigation about this, but it's not hard, because if you compare the other stones that were exposed, and we realized that the difference in stone masonry
yeah.
down there in the Valley Temple, the same quality of stone is over there, and it was exposed. It was not even under a casing stone of granite.
Originally, not only was the Mortuary Temple cased in precision carved granite, there is also evidence for the same type of curved and complex granite cornice blocks that are found on the Valley and Sphinx temples. In fact, the blocks here are even more sophisticated and difficult. Just a little way off to the side of the temple structure can be found what are sometimes called the couch blocks that have compound curved surfaces made with utter precision and very regular. Christopher Dunn, an expert manufacturing engineer and machinist with over 40 years in the industry, and someone I'm proud to say is a friend of mine, has studied the precisely made compound curved surfaces of these granite couch blocks and reported on his findings in his books, The Giza Power Plant and Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. Here's what he had to say about the couch blocks of the Mortuary Temple. Quote, "This piece of granite has all the hallmarks of machining. Cut into the pieces are characteristics that experienced machinists and designers use to allow a more rigid, stronger tool to be used to machine it. But, you may say, there were no machines in ancient Egypt. Why then would these features exist? We could say that there have been no machines found in the archaeological record that we can argue were responsible for this kind of work. This presents a bit of a conundrum, for there are no tools whatsoever in the ancient Egyptians' toolbox that can be used to replicate what has been crafted in igneous rock, and which imposes its majesty on our consciousness. But before we begin discussing what tools might have been responsible for cutting Egyptian stone in antiquity, let us take a look at what is machine-like about this block. The quality and precision of the piece are the same as on the cornice block near the Valley Temple. From a manufacturing perspective, this piece would have been more difficult to manufacture than the cornice. The cornice has a simple contour that is projected along a precise path without interruption. The couch has 3 vertical walls that I call arms and back, with a transitional and true 0.4375 inch or 11.112 millimeter tangent blend radius between the profile of the seat and the vertical arms and back that is consistent by comparative measure all around. The comparative measure was made from forming wax that was pressed into the radius and then checked in several places along the arm and back. The seat of the couch comprises tangent radii that flow down to the front with no discernible variation, ripple, dips, bumps, or ridges. I inspected the seat by holding the straight edge at several locations along its length and around the contour. There was no variation in the accuracy of the contour along the length of the seat or the radii's axes. We can clearly see the machinist-friendly feature of the couch in the corner of figure 6.20. The radius relief in the corner. This technique is commonly used by designers who wish to have a corner that has strength and also allows for the use of a larger, instead of a weaker, tool in machining. The contoured block on the Giza Plateau is an extraordinary piece. Because of its design, it suggests that it was made so that another component would fit against it, but I have no idea what that other component would be and what it would do. Perhaps it too, like the cornice, was merely another architectural element that had been broken out of its original place and has been lying out in the open on the plateau for millennia. End quote. So, not only do we have monumentally heavy blocks of masonry in this structure, we also see evidence for precision machining. I've always struggled to understand the reasoning behind building structures like this from such enormous single stone blocks. It's certainly possible to build similar structures from smaller and more manageable stones, as evidenced by many other 4th Dynasty Old Kingdom works on the Giza Plateau. Lots of structures here that are still standing are made from much smaller and undoubtedly easier to handle limestone masonry. One of the reasons for building with monumental blocks that I've heard quoted from Egyptologists is that the ancient Egyptians may have been aiming to make their buildings earthquake-proof by constructing them from blocks 100 tons and more. I'm not sure that is entirely logical, as despite the many documented earthquakes in this area over the last several millennia, some of the massively megalithic structures look to be in worse condition than do those made with smaller blocks, and according to the standard model, they were all made in roughly the same time period, from the same material, and these smaller stone structures weren't even cased in protective granite. Apparently, these buildings made from smaller stones are also able to deal with earthquakes quite well, not to mention erosion, and logistically they would have been exponentially easier to construct. From a logistical perspective, building with huge triple-digit ton blocks of stone is a tremendous challenge, and it's one that is only compounded when you consider what we know of the capabilities of the Old Kingdom dynastic Egyptian civilization. At this early period, there is no evidence that they utilized the wheel in any of its forms, and they only had access to metals like copper or bronze. From the depictions and records that we do have, all of the evidence points to stones being dragged on sleds, with no force multipliers like pulleys or capstans, using only sheer human horsepower and simple levers, which would have been very much limited by material strength, either wooden or soft metal like copper or bronze. I'm very doubtful that a civilization with these primitive capabilities alone would have been capable of quarrying, lifting, transporting, and putting in place loads that exceed, let's be generous and say 200 tons. I think it's been demonstrated that with leverage and careful planning and a lot of time and resources and effort, you might be able to move a 100-ton block a short distance and then maneuver it into place, but as the tonnage goes up, it's not a simple linear progression of difficulty. It becomes exponentially or logarithmically more difficult. The material strength of wood or softer metals becomes an issue. The friction coefficient of trying to drag huge loads on sleds goes through the roof, and depending on the area in which the work is happening, think of quarries, there simply isn't enough space to get enough people involved to provide the force required to lift and move such huge blocks of stone. Consider the unfinished obelisk at Aswan. How do you think they were going to lift this behemoth up out of its trench and move it over the very rocky and uneven ground with human horsepower and ropes alone? You can't simply just point to examples of wall paintings or depictions of the ancient Egyptians moving much smaller loads and then in some blanket fashion apply that method to weights that are 10 or 50 times greater. It just doesn't work that way. Yet that is exactly the reasoning and explanation the standard model gives you when you ask, how did they do it? As I've mentioned in previous videos, a good example of this is the Djibouti Hotep relief, showing a team of 160-odd workers moving a large statue on a sled. Now, this painting or this relief is used in just such a blanket fashion to explain how all large statues were moved. The problem is, scientific research into this calcite statue, parts of which still exist, show that it weighed somewhere around 57 tons. And this is in a peer-reviewed paper if you want to look it up. Could they have moved this statue in the fashion depicted in the wall painting? Sure. 57 tons, I think this is plausible. but I think it's stretching credulity, not to mention practical logistics, to suggest that this image explains how 1,000 plus ton statues were moved 1,000 kilometers or more. We know what it takes to move extremely heavy loads without the assistance of hydraulics or diesel power. As I've covered in previous videos on logistics and the colossal statues, the Thunderstone, some 1,500 tons, was moved from Finland to Russia in the 1700s, but it took a very long time and the use of capstans, pulleys, and huge steel rails running on bronze spheres, and even then, on a good day, it could have been moved only just over 100 meters. The crazy thing about ancient Egypt and these megalithic sites is that feats like this seem to have been completed on the regular, many thousands of years ago, and supposedly with far, far inferior levels of technology when compared to those available in the 1700s. There's only one Thunderstone, but there are dozens of huge stone blocks, statues, obelisks, etc. that weigh well in excess of 500 tons, if not over 1,000. How did they do it? The types of logistical miracles represented by blocks like the one in the Mortuary Temple, along with the obviously different building style when comparing structures with large blocks to those with small blocks, not to mention the erosional differences, are just a few of the reasons I think there is a legitimate alternative explanation for what we see. An explanation that points to far longer timelines, more advanced civilizations that have been lost to cataclysm and time, and that their remnants and remains are only visible today through the lens of thousands of years of inheritance, renovation, and rework. Let's round this video out with a quick look at some of the other interesting features of the Mortuary Temple, features that it shares with other megalithic structures on the Giza Plateau. One is the evidence for large blocks of white calcite, with an example found just on the ground inside the temple.
Granite stone and white calcite crystal as well.
Yeah, this is calcite, isn't it?
Yeah.
Another large block of calcite is found still embedded into the ground, evidently a part of the foundation. It's right next to yet another interesting feature of this site, a granite U-shaped channeled block that I think is evidence for some sort of subsurface infrastructure. We see these channeled blocks on both ends of the causeway, in both the mortuary and valley temple structures. And in my video on the Sphinx Temple, I highlighted the existence of a very large, approximately 70-ton granite U-shaped channeled block inside the rarely visited structure. These types of channeled infrastructure blocks also exist on other Old Kingdom sites, the ones with similar massive and precise stonework made from basalt, limestone, granite, and calcite, sites like Dashur, Saqqara, and Abu Sir. The last topic that I want to comment on, and I'm sure it's something you've noticed over the course of the video, is the utterly tremendous level of erosion that is present in the megalithic limestone blocks here. I'm going to do a deeper dive into this in a dedicated video in the near future, but I'll just leave you with this thought. It's interesting when you compare the erosion of the well-known megalithic structures like the Mortuary Temple with other 4th Dynasty limestone buildings on the plateau. According to the standard model, they were all built at roughly the same time by the same people. This structure, for example, just behind the Great Pyramid, is undoubtedly 4th Dynasty Old Kingdom work. It's the exact same type of limestone as the Mortuary Temple, Nummulitic limestone, yet this also was never cased in granite, as were the Mortuary Valley and Sphinx temples, and this granite would have actually protected the limestone from erosion. Yet today we see tremendous levels of erosion on these megalithic structures. This smaller block structure behind the Great Pyramid is at the exact same elevation as the Mortuary Temple, and presumably would have been subject to the same environmental conditions, yet it's in much better shape and shows very little erosion. On the Giza Plateau, there are many more examples and comparisons like this that can be made, that again, remember, according to the standard model, were all built at the same time from the same stone and by the same people as the much larger, much more heavily eroded megalithic structures. Why then is there such a stark difference in the level of erosion that we see? Food for thought, I think. I hope you enjoyed this look at some of the interesting features on the Giza Plateau. Please consider supporting Uncharted X through the value for value model. There's lots of ways to do that, and they're all outlined on my website at unchartedx.com/support. I want to extend a huge thank you to those who do support my work, whether it's on Patreon, Subscribestar, or YouTube channel memberships, or those who choose more direct support options. In particular, I want to acknowledge and thank the executive and associate executive producers for this episode. These are real credits, they work the same way that Hollywood credits do, and if you're interested in becoming a producer, please do check out the Uncharted X support page. Remember to take a look at my second channel, Uncharted X Live, and if you want to catch me on a live stream, join the Uncharted X Discord to get notified when I'm going live. The invite link is below in the description. Many thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.